Well, the question is on the wall. You've seen the writing on the wall, right? Do you really need difficulties? Do you have any? There's an old story that's floated around a long time about a guy. He had a friend, and he was going to help that friend move. So the day of the move, he went to the address that he was given, and he saw the big moving van in front of the house and the door. They were carrying furniture. The guys were carrying the furniture, house to van, van to house. So he just jumped in and started helping out. Now his friend came out and he said, "Stop, don't do this." And he said, "No, I came over to help." And he kind of pushed him aside and he worked all that much harder. And after a little bit, his friend who was moving managed to kind of nail him into a corner and say, "Stop." Why? Because I'm moving in, not out. You know, sometimes we work really hard, making things difficult in our lives. We invest a lot of energy running down the field to the wrong goal. Ever noticed that in your life? Yeah. Whew. There's an old story about that, and I guess it was a football game or something. Anyway, sometimes just like the guy trying to help move, we have to be knocked down and dragged out before we can be stopped from working against our own best interests. We pray. And I just want to suggest that there would be no point in praying to a God who knows no more than we do, right? And if we concede that God does know more than we do, why should we look to Him, look to that guidance and direction and intelligence so late in the game? Very old joke. You've heard it too many times. I really shouldn't tell it again, but it was on the Titanic. And after all the fuss and things, you know, the people running around and all the excitement, some woman went up to one of the officers and said, "What's there to be done?" And he said, "Pray, madam, pray." She said, "Oh. Has it come to that? Last resort. 11th, 12th hour, we do that. If we're lucky. Why do we wait so long? And then we go to God with fear in our hearts that God's going to take something good away from us. What we desire. This is one of the ways that we attract difficulties, that we create difficulties, and that we postpone our good and demand trouble along the way. Now, just as you have, I've been experiencing these last, 10 years or so, and watched. Well, one of our friends, one of Susan and my friends, would say, "Oh, every time I go to the grocery, prices are higher and higher." And the last years, I've watched mall after mall around Kansas City close. There have been some difficult times. And I wonder how many of those businesses had owners or managers who could only think about lack. There wasn't enough. There's no business. People don't have any money. We can't keep the doors open. What do you think all that kind of thinking does? And from thinking to speech. And from speech, it isn't long before it's action. move out and lock the door. There's no less now, no less in these last 10 years or so, than there has ever been in this world and in this universe. It's all energy. And what does physics tell you about energy? Cannot be created nor destroyed, only changes form. And it changes form according to our consciousness, how we think about it and how we draw upon it. Now, I know there are those who are involved in certain creative activities. One would consider what we do creative sometimes, right? Writing and other things. How many creative people will tell you, oh, I can't start on a project until I get the inspiration. I've said that more than once. And I'll tell you when my inspiration comes. Hour 11:45 out of a possible 12. There have been times I have been here working on the Lenten book. Oh, yes, I would tell you it's been working in my head, or the other books that I've put together over the years, working in my head. And that's true. But it's until, I'm going to borrow a word that the French-Canadian soprano I taught at the conservatory. I used to accompany for her students in her studio. And she used to tell them, tuck your fufun. So until my fufun's in the fire, that's when I start. How many writers who have contracts wait until the deadline is approaching fast and furiously? Composers, Mozart, Beethoven. The orchestras were rehearsing a symphony, and the copyists were bringing wet sheets of music to them as they were rehearsing, because they were still cranking it out while the rehearsals were going on. How we sometimes put off our good till the last minute. And what does all this do? Well, I'll tell you. It brings difficulties, right? You have to work furiously and invest a lot of energy and a lot of time. I can remember times when Stan was here, he would arrive about 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I'd say, "Hi, Stan," and I'd be going out the door in my grubby clothes because I had just finished putting together the portion of the booklet to hand out this day. We create difficulties for ourselves, don't we? In a variety of ways. There's an old story, and I heard it in Unity circles, about a woman who, when she was house cleaning, which was just one of many of the demands on her busy and crowded days, when she was complimented on how her house looked, she said, "I don't deserve any credit for that. I really don't. It's much easier to keep it straight than to straighten it up after it's a wreck." Have you discovered that one? She's pretty smart. Yeah, because you do little bit by little bit. Do it as it happens. Now, I know if you looked at my office, you'd never believe it, but when I cook at home, I like to do dishes as I cook. So when I'm done, there are no dishes. So I can walk away and I can go eat, and it's easy. I don't have to face the pots and pans and everything else along the way. Years ago, and of course, I've been around Unity since 1966, so I can't tell you how many years ago because I've forgotten. But Silent Unity used to share this affirmation. Through Christ, I discharge every duty promptly, efficiently, and cheerfully. through Christ, I discharge every duty promptly, efficiently, and cheerfully. And it begins with, through Christ. And this phrase is important. The time to invoke the divine help, divine wisdom, divine guidance is at the beginning of a project. Not when it's just about to fail in your lap. Not when time's about to run out, but when you're very beginning. To ask for and affirm the guidance, the insight, the intelligence, the energy, all things necessary for what is before you at the beginning. Golly, I hear that and I think, that makes so much sense. But how often I, and I'm sure you, have waited until the only thing to say is, oh, has it come to that? Oh, now we have to pray because there's no other. Oh, I can't tell you how many final exams at the conservatory I prayed my lights out about. Yeah. How many students cram at the last minute, putting it off and then try and jam it all in and wonder if they're going to get through the whole thing. Why wait until everything breaks down, until you're in warm water and wondering how you're going to get through a thing? It's not necessary to create our own difficulties. And yet, I do. Do you? I do. Now, the idea of that affirmation, through Christ, I discharge every duty promptly, efficiently, and cheerfully. I'm not saying that we need to plaster affirmations, fill our minds with affirmations, to repeat affirmations, and all our difficulties will magically cease. Using truth principles is a great way of overcoming challenges, overcoming difficulties, and finding joy in our lives. But it is a way to be traveled. And to travel what? You've got to move. You've got to get into action, into movement. Meaning, you affirm and then you follow up. You do what you're affirming. You move forward in faith. You have to do the work. You have to apply it, and you have to allow it to change you so that the situation outside of you will change. Do you catch that? Allow it to change you so that what's outside and the problem you seem to be facing can change only by changing you. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we talked about practical Christianity and a little bit of information about what Jesus taught. And Charles Fillmore called it practical Christianity. But using practical Christianity in our lives, well, it's one of the greatest tools that we can, it is the greatest tool that we can possibly use for challenges and adversity. But there's also a paradox involved. You've heard of paradoxes in spirituality. There's a paradox here. Two kinds of problems. Problems that arise as a result of immature actions. Truth works very well. When I say immature, remember in Aramaic and in the Bible, you see the word bisha. Evil figs. it means immature, unripe. And we do things, we make decisions that are immature, spiritually unripe. So truth works very well, because when you're applying an affirmation and remembering the truth about yourself and about God, you're reminding yourself of reality, and you begin to dispel the false concepts and the limited ideas we've had about life and about God. Truth works very well in these situations. When we commit our lives to right thought and right action. But there's a second kind of problem that arises. And it's not from a wrong attitude toward life, but from the need to grow. I don't know who said it. Can't remember who said it, but I remember what they said. Challenges, and we'll say difficulties, come sometimes not because you did something wrong, but because you did something right. And you opened yourself to a new level of understanding, and you begin to see something that has not been working in your life, but you didn't see it before. So you're presented with a wonderful opportunity to grow in awareness and grow in the use of truth and practical Christianity in your life. You've all experienced this. When you take a class, you take lessons in truth, or you take teachings of Jesus, and you grasp something, and all of a sudden you have that aha moment, say, no wonder I've been having problems with this. No wonder such and such is not working in my life. That's a wonderful place where you are ready to open and see your life from a higher perspective. They're opportunities for our own personal growth. They're blessings that we do not yet understand, that we haven't yet seen the good in them. And the real insurance in all of this, the insurance that you need to buy, well, you can't buy it, but you need to apply it, is faith. That perceiving power of your mind, linked with the power to form and shape substance. The power of your mind to apprehend the truth about a situation, about yourself, about the possibilities that are open before you, instead of holding on to the limited ideas that we've been taught as children, in school, in churches, and by parents and well-meaning friends, and even Unity ministers. One of my dear friends who said to me, well, Greg, and a Unity minister, we all have to realize we're only human. Sorry. No. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, but that's not what we are. What are you? You know what you are. The image likeness of the Creator, created in the image, after the likeness of God. God's beloved child, in whom God is well pleased, right? That's not, well, Greg, we have to face it, we're only human. Cancel. That's not true. Knowing the truth, and then remaining firm and committed to overcome, because we know that if we're there, the principle works for us. If you work it. If you remember. Then we will prosper. We shall overcome. We shall see brighter days. The Bible says they shall prosper that love thee. Thank you, psalmist. What a beautiful statement. They shall prosper that love thee. In other words, and that prosper means all good. Comes to those who remember. Love thee. Remember that oneness, connection, unity. Love is the idea of universal unity. So they remember their oneness with the source, with the Creator, with all the power that God is. Plato's an interesting character and some interesting reading. I'm still waiting for them to find Atlantis, thanks to his writing. You know, he described Atlantis in some of his writing. He speaks of two kinds of blindness that affect us. Blindness of going from light into darkness. You know what that's like, right? You come out of the light and you walk into a dark building and all of a sudden you can't see. And your sight has been diminished. And as long as it seems to get a little better, but it's diminished from out in the light. And the other kind is from moving from darkness into the light of day. And these two are as different as night and day. The blinding that happens from turning from light into darkness leaves our sight weak in the moment. We see much less when we get inside the building. The other one, coming out of darkness into light, first it's blinding, but then our eyes adjust and we see more than we had ever seen walking in the darkness. Is that not true? Yeah. This is what happens to us when we move through a growth challenge from darkness into light, into the light of God. We see every problem in the bright light of day, into the light of Spirit. We begin to see that there is an opportunity in this problem, in this challenge, in this difficulty. And we can discover the power of Spirit that works through us in that very thing, if we face it with our eyes open. Remember the man born blind? And the disciples wanted to know, first off, they wanted to know whose fault is it? Who sinned? This man? Wait a minute. The man was born blind. So, if they're asking who sinned, this man or his parents, the man would have had to have sinned before birth. Whoa, that must have been a wonderful party. Yeah. Cards, I think. Other wild little women running around. Some interesting things to drink. I think not, you know. But Jesus said, it's that the truth, is that the good of God might be manifest. What does that mean? It's one of those difficulties that's an opportunity. That when the light comes, the sight comes, there's new awareness and learning that raises us to a higher level. And we're able to say, wow, now all is well. And now I understand. Ernest Wilson. This was Ernest Wilson's room after Myrtle passed and Charles retired from the Sunday services. Ernest was given the chapel here as senior minister. My class got to spend a couple of Tuesday afternoons in his apartment before he passed. And he told this wonderful old Unity story, and he said it's a true story. He says, probably Could have been 20s, might have been 1930s, but it's early. That there was a large gathering of Unity students, some kind of, probably one of those sessions where they were doing some bunch of lectures and teaching truth to people. And in the auditorium, up on the stage, there was a speaker's platform, and there were 3 women, all of pretty good size. I'm saying generous proportion women. And one of the women had a lorgnette. Remember those? Well, you wouldn't remember them, but it was a pair of like reading glasses with a handle. She wore glasses. And questions were accepted from the audience. They were written and handed in, you know. And you can imagine, and the women were up there, and the question came and was read aloud. If I understand correctly, you teach a doctrine of enduring youth and beauty. Oh, and that's true. May Rowland was really part of that youthfulness, and she worked with affirmations for youth and youthfulness. And the question continued. And the overcoming of physical problems. Why is it then that the 3 women speakers on the platform are overweight and one wears glasses? He said, this was a true story. Oh, I can see this happening. Now, the question had been read by the woman with the lorgnette. Now, you can see, I can imagine the lips pursed, and there was a moment of silence. Then her laugh broke the silence, and she said, if you think that I'm large now, you should have seen me before I began to study truth. Okay. I think she got him. Few people have completed their work in what Charles called regeneration. You know, you haven't seen a whole bunch of people going off in ascension. We're probably rising by millimeters. We're growing by degrees. But we look at a span of time and say, oh my God, this takes so long. That's especially true if you talk to a young child. Talk to an old person. How long is it between your birthdays? Yeah, you remember as a child it was, oh my goodness, school starts and Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and Easter, Memorial Day, school's out, 4th of July, trip to Florida every year. And then you get some years older and it's birthday. It's all a matter of consciousness, isn't it? Do something you love, and how fast does the time go? Do something that's difficult and you don't want to do it. Oh, God, this seemed... I just looked at my watch an hour ago, and it's only 10 minutes later. How relative the time is. So we say, oh, it takes so long. But we're in a process. How much time do we have? And how long will it take? That's up to us. By the choices we make day by day, by the challenges that we create for ourselves, and then how we handle them or don't. Oh, oh God, why did you bring this to me? And what's the universe doing? I can do that whine pretty good. That's better than Mogan David. Few people have completed this process of regeneration, and I think that we're all some of them. We can't judge anyone correctly, rightly, Jesus probably would have said, by appearances, by just looking at them and looking at the portion, the little tiny piece of their lives that we see. We need to know how far they have come and what direction they're going. Are they going up? Are they growing? Or are they taking themselves in a different direction? That same visit with Ernest Wilson, he told another story too, and this one's true. Man came here to Ernest's office. He wanted some help. He was, as Ernest put it, an habitual drunk. Now, somehow this guy had come across a copy of Unity material, Unity publication, and it had the address on it. So he came to this location, and he sought out Ernest Wilson. And Ernest was impressed. He said that the guy's eagerness to learn more about principle and about spiritual life was impressive. So for the first few weeks, Ernest told us that his visits demonstrated a kind of consistent intoxication. And then gradually he began to show that there was a change. Ernest said his walk became kind of lively. He began to show in his drinking some self-control, some discretion. And so Ernest, in one of these later visits, he said, as he saw this in the guy, these changes that looked so positive, he said, I know you've got some good news for me. And the guy said, I sure have. And Ernest said, well, what is it? What do you need? What do you have to tell me? He said, I only get drunk once a week now. Ernest said he was so disappointed, so very disappointed in the guy, because he was thinking the guy failed. This is Ernest Wilson, who then admitted that this was his own problem, his own issue. He was judging the man by his own criteria. And he said, he came to realize that in his own life, Ernest Wilson's own life, he said that I don't believe I had grown as much as that man had in just a few weeks. That was an awesome story. Really reminds us what it's about, all of the judgment we do. How absolutely useless and unnecessary it really is. The only judgment, according to Jesus, is righteous judgment. And that's according to truth. And what does righteous judgment tell you about that guy? Absolutely, child of God, with whom God is well pleased. Remember, the Bible says God is of pure eyes and to behold iniquity, than to see the difficulties, but sees the light that we don't see in ourselves or others, sees it there, sees the light of its own presence right there. I have in my own life Change my attitude about people and watch those people change. What changed? Me. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, lift all men up unto me. Each one of us, if we lift up our thinking and our perceptions of other people, we also lift them up. That spirit within us connects to the spirit within them. We see them in a new light, and they begin to perceive that true reality of who and what they are. And that's when you become a beneficial presence and not a manufacturer of difficulties. Do we need them? Some aid our growth, and others, we just throw roadblocks in our way. Do you need the ones that are just roadblocks? Do you need to fill your mind and your life with negative judgments about yourself, about the economy, about your health, about whatever? You don't. The stuff that comes as a possible blessing, embrace it. And remember, call upon that presence and power of God at the first hour, not the 11th or 11:57. That's one of my favorite times, 11:57.